That's significant because when I drove here and I heard it was going to be here, I immediately thought back to my own childhood. Some of you may know that I direct a gospel ensemble. So even though I practice law, I know you just think about it. A lawyer directing a gospel ensemble. I don't know how it works today. But I've been doing that and started it when I was 13 years old. It is now a Grammy-nominated entity and have won Stellar Awards, which is the highest award in gospel. But guess what? That group started rehearsing in this very room. And so that to me is a very powerful thing because why? We were all children. It wasn't like the church choir, which is usually different. You go to church and your mom and dad tells you, hey, you're going to sing in the choir. And you are mad, no, I don't want to do it. But we were young children, 13 and 14 years old, coming together in order to sing. And now I have a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old at home. And in fact, yesterday, and this is all leading someplace. Oh, that's right, I know. So yesterday, my 7-year-old started flag football. And he was very excited. And as I thought about this report, I thought about my own 2 African-American boys, 7 and 9 years old. And what does this data say? What are those things that I can look forward to as his father, or what challenges does this data present for me in order to say, hey, here's what's going to help focus me, not only for my own children, but even for Mary's children and the other children that we see around. One thing that jumped out to me, and I like the way that you talked about it when you talked about education. And we all know about the achievement gap. And we know that that is something that is constantly on our mind. And we can talk about the high dropout rate. I know it's 41%. I looked at the information up there. And we can talk about the importance of early childhood development because I understood even when I had my own children that it was important for them to be able to get those, to start on that journey of being life learners from the very beginning. And what really jumped out to me was the fact that you said 41% of African American children graduate, right? But that's still 41% that we can feel positive about. And even though we have some work to do, we can sometimes always focus on the glass being half empty, but what about it being half full? And what do we need to do to support those children as well as the other children who might not be graduating? The other thing that stuck out to me, and I did, do some research and talked about the number of children in poverty. Because you got to remember that even here in North Minneapolis, growing up here, not all children had their mom and dad live in the household like I did, right? But Minnesota grew between 2000 and 2008, where there was a third of children, around 149,000 that were living in poverty, and it was projected that an additional 33%, around 205,000, would also live in poverty. And we know that poverty is the common denominator when you think in terms of the disparities that we face, be it education, health. They're just those other race and other factors that we believe to be important. Unemployment. Lewis King often says that the best social program is a job. And I happen to agree with that. And if you think about it, and this ties to children, because one of the things that you talk about is the high number of children who grow up in poverty, and a direct correlation to that is high unemployment. And there was this guy, Algernon Austin, and you read that study where he talked about, look, you can look at the Minnesota unemployment rate, and at the time it was 7.8, but now it's like 6.6, right? But when you pull back the onion and you start looking at African Americans, even during that time, our unemployment rate was at least 20.4%. Now, the interesting thing about unemployment data is that it doesn't tell you about the number of people who have just given up and is no longer looking for a job. And so, when you begin to pull back, so what do we need to do, right? In order to make sure that little Jalen or little Miles, those are my children's names, Miles. Miles is 7 going on 30. I often tell people that. But how do we make sure that he has a a chance to really be as successful as possible. And we can talk about foreclosures and health challenges and violence. In North Minneapolis, one of the notes that came to me is for us to talk about the challenges in our district, because I also represent not just the southern part of North Minneapolis, but I represent the North Loop or the Warehouse District and half of downtown. That's my entire district. But when you think in terms of the high rates of childhood obesity, when you think in terms of asthma, you think about the incinerator, and just other health-related challenges. But something that jumped up to me, but I didn't necessarily see it on your in your study, and I'm not suggesting that it's not there, I just didn't see it, was this whole notion around incarcerated parents. I mean, I looked at the stats, and that right now in Minnesota's correctional facilities, there are 9,027 males, 623 females. But when you look at those who make up that number, 53% are white and 36% are African American. And we know the correlation between the education. You all know all this information, so I don't feel like I have to regurgitate it. But when you now look at the population, so even though you look at those numbers, 36% of those incarcerated are African Americans, when African Americans only make up 4.7% of the statewide population. Now, you think, well, why is he mentioning that? Because that represents children who don't have a parent in their household. I mean, somewhere along the way, a child doesn't have a mom or a dad. And I saw the research that you did there. The question was asked, how many feel like they're loved by their parents or something like that? And that's an interesting question, because love is something that's very important, because love can inspire you to do those things that you feel like you really can't do. But if someone else believes in you, that was interesting, and that jumped out to me. So I'm going to be quiet, because I believe that there are more folks who have some great things to say, but I have some more to say. You know, you can